Good afternoon. I'm calling this workshop to order at 1:03 p.m. For the record, I am Mark Voloshin, Deputy Secretary of State for Elections, and I will be conducting this regulations workshop today. First and foremost, if you are interested in participating in this meeting, you can call 1-888-475-4499 and then provide the meeting ID number 886-7819-7051. Again, that is 1-888-475-4488 with a meeting ID of 886-7819-7051. When prompted for a participant ID, please press pound. Then press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Agenda item 2, public comment on matters not on the agenda. Comment will be limited to 2 minutes per person for this first public comment. If anyone is interested in providing public comment about a matter not on the agenda, please come forward. Identify yourself and state your name or spell your name for the record.
Hi, my name is Christine Kramer. I am from Las Vegas, Nevada, and I just, in my public comment, starting the agenda, I would just like to, again, commend the staff of the Secretary of State's office and thank you for having a public workshop that allows for citizens to ask questions and receive answers and discuss in depth how elections will be operated for the presidential preference primary that I'm very excited to have happen in my state, and that the eyes of the world certainly watch Nevada, and we offer so many great opportunities as candidates come to our state to earn votes from Nevadans. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Edwin Zimenda from North Las Vegas, Nevada, and I appreciate you having me here to comment on public commentary for the proposed regulations. Thank you.
Now I will move to Las Vegas. Again, this is public comment on matters not relating to any item on the agenda. Seeing none, broadcasting, can we check the phones, please?
To provide public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. We currently have no callers wishing to provide comment.
Excellent. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the regulations. Agenda item 3. It is noted for the record that regulations will be addressed one at a time in numerical order. Public comment will be taken in the same order, and public comment on a particular regulation will be closed before moving on to the next regulation. Before public comment is opened on each regulation, I will read into the record a summary of the proposed changes. Before we begin, I want to clarify a few things. Our discussion today during this workshop will be focused on the proposed regulations listed in the agenda. We should not discuss changing statutes, which are, of course, created by the legislature. This regulatory process will not alter any existing laws. Regulations, after all, cannot make something illegal that is otherwise legal, nor make something legal that is otherwise illegal. These regulations in this regulatory review are intended to update our regulations based on experiences learned during the previous election cycle and county clerk and registrar input, with the expressed intent of increasing security and transparency. Furthermore, we are here today because of two specific statutes, NRS 293.124 and NRS 293.247. NRS 293.124 establishes the Secretary of State as the Chief Officer of Elections. It states, quote, "The Secretary of State shall serve as the Chief Officer of Elections for this state. As Chief Officer, the Secretary of State is responsible for the execution and enforcement of the provisions of Title 24 of NRS and all other provisions of state and federal law relating to elections in the state. The Secretary of State shall adopt such regulations as are necessary to carry out the provisions of this section," end quote. NRS 293.247 states, "The Secretary of State shall adopt regulations not inconsistent with the election laws of this state for the conduct of primary, presidential preference primary, general, special, and district elections in all cities and counties." There's a lot more to it, but those provisions are what have brought us here today. If there are general questions about elections procedures, I'll be able to discuss them today as long as they relate to the proposed regulations. If there are questions that extend beyond the regulations on the agenda, I would be more than happy to set up a separate meeting at another time. To do so, please contact me at nvelect@sos.nv.gov. This is the public workshop for the Secretary of State Elections Division's proposed regulations with the LCB file numbers of R013-23P and R014-23P. The text of all proposed regulations has been provided. The notice of workshop to solicit comments on proposed regulation was noticed at all required locations on August 11th. Each of these documents is hereby submitted into the record. As of this morning, the Secretary of State has received written public comment from multiple organizations and individuals. The written public comment received by the Secretary of State's office is hereby submitted into the record. A few administrative notes. I will be taking notes while you are providing comments. If you see me looking down, it is because I am typing. Once I get to the public comment portion, I will first take public comment here in Carson City, then in Las Vegas, and finally via Zoom. To be clear, this meeting is a discussion. If you ask a question, as long as it is related to the agenda item, I will be able to answer it. Please keep in mind the purpose of these meetings is so that we can get your thoughts and suggestions on the proposed regulations. Once we are complete here today, my team and I will discuss and analyze your suggestions, bringing them to the county clerks for input if necessary, before ultimately making recommendations to the Secretary. Finally, I understand that discussions about elections can get intense, and I am excited about talking with you today, but I must ask that each of you treat each other with dignity and respect. Your fellow Americans in this room and listening in today may have different opinions, but they are worthy of your courtesy. Agenda item 4. We'll now begin the workshop regarding proposed regulation R013-23P. Existing law requires the Secretary of State to 1. Establish a system of approved electronic transmission through which covered voters may register to vote and apply for and cast a ballot, and 2. Prescribe the form and content of a declaration for use by a covered voter to swear or affirm specific representations pertaining to the voter's identity, eligibility to vote, status as a covered voter, and timely and proper completion of a military overseas ballot. Existing regulations prescribe the form of such a declaration, which differs depending on whether the covered voter indicates that he or she will return the military overseas ballot by approved electronic transmission or by mail. Existing regulations further require the local election official to provide to a covered voter certain instructions for marking and returning the military overseas ballot. Section 1 of this regulation provides that such instructions must include an explanation that the covered voter must complete and sign the applicable declaration indicating that he or she will return the military overseas ballot either by approved electronic transmission or mail. Existing regulations require a local elections official to count a military overseas ballot signed by a covered voter using a digital signature or electronic signature unless the local elections official reasonably believes that someone other than the covered voter signed the ballot. Section 2 of this regulation provides that if a covered voter attempts to submit by approved electronic transmission a military overseas ballot and inadvertently submits more than one military overseas ballot, only the first military overseas ballot received by the local election official may be counted. At this time, I will open up public comment on proposed regulation R013-23P. If there's anybody that wishes to speak about or provide testimony regarding proposed regulation R013-23P, please come up to the front, state your name for the record, and begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Edwin Ismenda, and I served in the U.S. Army for 20 years. During my service, I was a unit voting officer. And in reviewing both the rules of the presidential preference primary and the military overseas ballots, there may be a discrepancy that may disadvantage active duty military from voting for the candidate of their presidential preference in the February 6th primary. If a service member is present in Nevada and they receive a ballot that does not reflect the candidate they wish to vote for, these voters can go to a local voter center or their county clerk to change their party affiliation for the candidate of their choice. However, as you know, when you're stationed overseas or in stateside, meaning not in Nevada, it may be difficult to conduct this process by mail. Therefore, my request is for our military and overseas ballots that a clear and unambiguous process be included for all service members to change party affiliation and receive an electronic ballot to vote for the candidate who has earned their role. These instructions in a clear format are available to those of us who who, while serving our country in the battlefield and overseas, take on an additional task of servicing democracy via facilitating overseas voting and military voting. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to make sure I understand, the concern is that when voters receive their military and overseas ballot, including somewhere in the instructions, clarification as to how they would change their party affiliation. Is that?
Yes, because, depending on whenever they registered, they may have changed.
Right,
So
right.
therefore, the ease of use of changing their party affiliation and receiving the correct ballot, no matter where they are in the world.
No, that's an excellent point, and I think I understand the nature of the problem that you're recommending that we address through regulation, because I think in speaking to that specifically, right, like even military and overseas voters have the ability to go to register-to-vote.nv.gov at any time to update their party affiliation, and certainly, both from an outreach standpoint, encouraging voters to review their voter registration prior to mail ballots being mailed not later than the 45th day before the election, which of course is December 23rd this year for the PPP. That there's that option available, but you're right. I see if they didn't know about that, they receive a ballot. It may be, or maybe they don't, right? Because if they're not if they're not aligned with a party that has the PPP going on, then it could be challenging. I think I understand. Okay.
Yeah, also, as you know, we recruit from right out of high school, so they may have never voted prior to joining the military. And then if they're overseas, that means they're over 18, thus eligible to vote. And, as is my experience as a voting officer, I had to have young soldiers like, oh, I can vote? It's like, yeah, man, I'm sorry. Yes, you can vote. Yes, you can vote. You're a citizen, right? And it's like, yes, I would like to vote. And thus how we get their ballots and so forth, once they identify me and get the correct ballot for whatever state they're from and so forth. So, like I said, a lot of these service members, even activated from the National Guard here, have never voted before. So they're like, well, how do I register? So we want to make sure the process is unambiguous and clear. So, as you know, we're teaching kids, essentially. That's what we call them. And we have to teach them how to vote. Not teach them, but suggest to them, hey, this is how you do it, and so forth. And so they can pass it on to future military service members.
That's an excellent point too. I mean, you think about the high school graduates from just this past couple of months who have decided to raise their right hand and enter the service. They will have worked their way through that initial training pipeline and gotten to the operating forces, or even through some of their advanced schooling, probably right around December, January time period, just in time to both experience the joys of military service as well as potentially their first election. It's an excellent point. Thank you for bringing it up.
And also anyone who is, split ops, they're 17, and then they're going to be eligible by the general election to vote. Therefore, they're eligible to vote. So once again, clear and unambiguous process to register to vote for their presidential preference.
Perfect. Thank you. I understand the nature of the problem, and we'll certainly take this back and discuss it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Christine Kramer. I'm of Las Vegas, Nevada. One of the reasons why I actively advocated for our state to move from a caucus to a primary was that the caucus process really did not allow, when it's controlled by the party, to have our service members participate and express their presidential preference. Again, I'm just looking for very often when I served in Clark County, Nevada, as the neutral, within the Democratic Party, the neutral credentials chair in 2012 and 2016. And very often, voters don't know what their party affiliation is. And so when we're changing from the caucus, where the caucus is controlled by you show up to either the meeting of the Republican or the Democratic Party that day, and there's not a lot of forethought required to that. It's going to, and very often, and this was from reviewing the credentials of these meetings, very often it would just depend not on our voters in this state being loyal to one party or the other. It's that are most engaged. This is a very entertaining process that happens in Nevada, that we're one of the first states that picks president. And very often voters will go to candidates from both major parties. And then the privilege of the caucus is that on caucus day, you picked who you wanted. And so in this process, I'm excited that our military service members, for the very first time in Nevada, get to have a vote in this very early, exciting process. And that I would like for them to know that, first of all, that this is the first time that they're included. I think that that will increase voter turnout overseas, that this is the first time you get this exciting privilege. And second of all, if for some reason, going with our strong tradition as Nevadans, that we expect presidential candidates to come to Nevada and earn the votes, and they should earn the votes of our military service members, that they have a fair and clear process to participate. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Kramer. And yes, to confirm, again, the PPP is a federal primary, so you're absolutely right that the military and overseas voters will be able to participate through not only receiving the military and overseas ballot, but also through the use potentially of the Secretary's effective absentee system for elections, or EASE, that will also be turned on, so to speak, the week of 18th of December, so that it is on and functioning for those military and overseas voters, along with the other voter populations who are eligible to use it, no later than the 23rd of December, pursuant to federal requirements.
And I would just like to add, I would love for our overseas military service members to know that they may actually, with the way the ballots come out, be the very first citizens in the United States, very first American citizens to get to vote in the presidential preference primary because of the way that the voting calendar sets up. While New Hampshire and South Carolina, technically their votes are counted before ours, our ballots go out before theirs. So I would love, as a Nevadan, that our service members know that they may be the very first people who get to add their voice to who our next president may be.
Yes, ma'am. And along those lines, historically speaking, the first people to cast a ballot, like you said, it's not tabulated, of course, but there are a number of Nevadan voters who, when those military and overseas ballots go out the week up to the 45th day, there's a couple, 2, 3 that will return it within a day. And so historically, we've had a ballot cast to a county and retained for tabulation at the appropriate time that early in the election cycle. So that's an excellent point to raise as well. Thank you. Not seeing anybody else in Carson, we'll go to Las Vegas to see if there's any other proposed comments on, any public comments on proposed regulation R013-23P. Not seeing anybody in Las Vegas. Broadcast, could we go to the phones, please?
To provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. You have no callers wishing to provide public comment at this time.
Thank you, Broadcasting. In that case, then, I will close public comment on proposed regulation R013-23P, and we'll begin. I will open the workshop relating to proposed regulation R014-23P. Existing law prohibits a person from being a candidate of a major political party for partisan office in an election if that person has changed his or her political party affiliation or his or her designation of political party from nonpartisan to a designation of a political party affiliation during the time beginning on December 31st, preceding the closing filing date for the election and ending on the date of the election. Section 2 of this regulation provides that a person is not prohibited from being a candidate of a major political party if 1, the person's political party affiliation was changed unintentionally as a result of a transaction with an automatic voter registration agency, or 2, the person had not previously registered to vote in the state and submits an application to register to vote designating an affiliation with a major political party, unless he or she registers to vote in the state during such a period and was previously registered in another state with a different political party affiliation or a designation of nonpartisan. Existing law requires that a person to file a declaration of candidacy with the appropriate filing officer before his or her name may be printed on a ballot to be used in an election. Sections 3 and 17 of this regulation authorize a person to file a declaration of candidacy, 1, by mailing the notarized documents, 2, in person, or 3, if authorized by the filing officer, virtually using a remote technology system. Sections 3 and 17 also set forth certain requirements for filing a declaration of candidacy virtually. Existing law prohibits a person from filing nomination papers for or holding more than one elective office at the same time, except that a person may file nomination papers or hold an elective office of a special district and file nomination papers for or hold an elective office of the state, a political subdivision, or a municipal corporation. Section 4 of this regulation clarifies that a person may not file nomination papers for or hold more than one elective office of a special district. Existing law authorizes the county clerk, with certain exceptions, to charge and collect an additional fee for filing and recording a declaration of candidacy for public office. Section 5 of this regulation provides that if a county clerk charges an additional fee for filing and recording a declaration of candidacy, the county clerk must charge the additional fee for all public offices for which a declaration of candidacy is filed with the county clerk. Section 5 also requires the county clerk to report certain information relating to any additional fees charged for filing and recording a declaration of candidacy to the Secretary of State. Section 6 of this regulation authorizes a candidate, spouse of the candidate, or a member of the campaign staff of a candidate to submit a photograph of the candidate to the Office of the Secretary of State to be published on the internet website of the Secretary of State, and establishes certain requirements for submitting such a photograph. Existing law establishes various requirements for a petition, which is required to be verified. Section 7 of this regulation provides that a county clerk may reject a signature on a petition if 1, the person was not registered to vote on the date he or she signed the petition, 2, the person signed for an incorrect petition district, 3, the person subsequently requested to have his or her name removed from the petition, or 4, the signature of the person on the petition does not match any signature in the file of applications to register to vote. Section 7 prohibits a county clerk from rejecting a signature on a petition if 1, the petition is printed double-sided unless the signature is illegible or impossible to compare to the signatures in the file of applications to register to vote, 2, if the name is printed in the wrong order, or 3, based on the color of ink used for the signature. Section 7 further provides that if an address on a petition does not match the address in the files of the county clerk must notify the registered voter and may not verify the signature unless the registered voter demonstrates that he or she is a registered voter. Lastly, Section 7 requires a county clerk to allow a person who submits the petition and a public officer who is the subject of a recall petition to witness the verification of the signatures. Section 8 of this regulation provides that the electronic summary of the votes cast in an election is a public record and is subject to inspection upon request. Existing law requires a voter to whom a mail ballot has been sent who applies to vote in person at a polling place to surrender his or her mail ballot or sign an affirmation under penalty of perjury that he or she has not voted during the election. If the voter surrenders his or her mail ballot, the election board officer must mark the mail ballot canceled. Sections 9 and 18 of this regulation provide that to mark a mail ballot canceled, an election board officer must 1, use a rubber stamp to stamp the ballot or stamp both the ballot and the return envelope, or 2, handwrite canceled on the mail ballot or on both the mail ballot and the return envelope. Existing law requires the county clerk and city clerk to distribute mail ballots not later than 14 days before the election. Existing regulation provides that if a registered voter updates his or her address after the date the mail ballot is sent, but on or before the 14th day before the election, the county or city clerk must mail a second mail ballot to the registered voter and cancel the first mail ballot. Section 14 of this regulation provides that if a voter who has changed his or her address after the date the mail ballots were sent returns his or her first mail ballot, the first mail ballot shall be deemed to have been legally cast, and 2, if the county or city clerk has already distributed the second mail ballot, the county or city clerk must cancel the second mail ballot, or if the second mail ballot has not been distributed, the county or city clerk must not distribute the second mail ballot. Section 10 of this regulation provides that if a voter submits a new application to register to vote or updates his or her voter registration information to change his or her name or political party affiliation after the county or city clerk has distributed the mail ballots and returns the mail ballots, The mail ballot shall be deemed to have been legally cast under the previous legal name or political party affiliation of the registered voter. Existing law authorizes a candidate defeated at an election or a voter at an election to demand a recount under certain circumstances. Existing law also requires a county or city clerk to allow members of the general public to observe the counting of the ballots at the central counting place if those members do not interfere with the counting of ballots. Section 11 of this regulation, 1, authorizes with certain limitations any person to observe a recount. 2, requires that before a person may observe the recount, the person must sign an acknowledgement that certain behavior is prohibited. 3, authorizes under certain circumstances the county or city clerk to limit the number of persons observing the recount. 4, authorizes under certain circumstances the county or city clerk to remove a person observing the recount. And 5, requires a person to wear a name tag while observing the recount. Existing law authorizes an elector to register to vote in person during the period for early voting or on the day of the election. To register, the elector must, among other requirements, present his or her current and valid driver's license or identification card issued by the Department of Motor Vehicles. If his or her driver's license or identification card does not contain his or her current residential address, the elector may present certain documents to establish residency. Existing law also authorizes a local government which accepts an identification card issued by, Existing law also authorizes a local government which accepts an identification card issued by the Department of Motor Vehicles for any activity or transaction to also accept a tribal identification card. Section 12 of this regulation requires an election board officer to accept a tribal identification card as proof of identity and residency from an elector who appears in person to register to vote. Section 12 also provides an elector may present certain temporary photographic identification cards issued by the Department of Corrections or another agency of the state as proof of residency if his or her driver's license or identification card issued by the Department of Motor Vehicles does not contain his or her current residential address. Existing law provides that the name of the candidate printed on a ballot may be given the name and surname of the candidate or a contraction or familiar form of his or her given name, followed by his or her surname. Sections 13 and 19 of this regulation provide that the candidate's surname may be his or her original surname or married surname. Existing law provides that if a voter fails to affix his or her signature to his or her mail ballot or fails to affix his or her signature in the manner provided by law, or if there is any question of fact as to whether the signature used for the mail ballot matches the signature of the voter must provide a signature or confirmation not later than 5 p.m. on the 6th day following the election. Sections 15 and 20 of this regulation provide that the offices of a county or city clerk may, but are not required to, remain open on weekends or outside of normal working hours to provide signature verification. Existing law authorizes a covered voter to apply for a military overseas ballot or to register to vote and apply for a military overseas ballot by submitting a federal postcard application or the application's electronic equivalent if the application or electronic equivalent of the application is received before the time set for closing of polls on Election Day. Existing law also requires the Secretary of State to establish a system of approved electronic transmission through which covered voters, may register to vote, apply for a military overseas ballot, and cast a military overseas ballot. Section 21 of this regulation requires, upon receipt of a federal postcard application, a local elections official to timestamp the application. Section 21 also provides that if a covered voter submits a federal postcard application to apply for a military overseas ballot or to register and apply less than 14 days before an election, 1, the Secretary of State will attempt to contact the voter and provide certain information related to the deadline to cast and return a military overseas ballot, and the option to cast a military overseas ballot using the system of approved electronic transmission. And 2, the local election official is required to contact the covered voter, if practicable, to provide certain information relating to the use of the system of approved electronic transmission. At this time, I will open public comment on proposed regulation R014-23P. If there's anybody who's interested in providing public comment, please come up to the front, state your name, and begin.
Hello, my name is Christine Kramer. I'm of Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm excited to be offering testimony on our Nevada's first presidential preference primary. I'm going to just go section by section of the proposed statement. So in section 9, as to a voter applies to vote in person at a polling place and surrenders their mail ballot. As I examine all of these rules, it's not very clear that individuals can change their party affiliation and at what points in the process. And that I know that this may get into changing the statute, but there should be some form of communication that it will be important to adequately staff the polling locations for individuals who both want to surrender a ballot and to change their party affiliation. I served as the credentials chair of the Democratic Party of Clark County in 2012 and 2016. 2012 was an unopposed election, so it was fairly straightforward. However, 2016, we had a surge of independent and even Republican voters coming in the nature of a caucus. And the reason why it's so exciting for Nevadans to have a caucus is that presidential candidates come in and they campaign to everyone, regardless of your party affiliation. And then Nevada voters had the option of if they were going to attend the Republican or the Democrat meeting. And so I don't want to disenfranchise voters as we move into a presidential preference primary. And all of these rules should clearly express that while many websites will say that Nevada's presidential preference primary election is a closed primary because you need to be registered either as a Democrat or a Republican, that it truly is not, because an individual does have the right, because we have same-day voter registration, to return their ballot and vote the party of their preference. A concern for me looking at these rules is that a voter may get frustrated or may not understand how write-in elections work, and that if you write in the name of the candidate of your choice, but it's on the incorrect ballot, that individual's name is not going to count, and those votes for that individual won't be consolidated at the final reconciliation and certification of the vote. Those are my comments generally about Section 9 and about that we need clear and unambiguous instructions to the public, because this is the first presidential preference primary, that they have the right up until Election Day to go to a vote center, to change their party affiliation, and that the way to make the election run most efficiently would be when they receive that mail-in ballot in the mail. I would never want to call a ballot wrong, but in the eyes of the voter, they get a ballot in the mail, they may consider it wrong because the candidate that has earned their vote doesn't appear on it, and that those instructions may be in the sample ballot to include, if this sample ballot doesn't reflect the way you wish to vote, or have the presidential preference sample ballot be, here is the sample ballot offered to both voters, because during that sample ballot time, when it arrives in the mail to individuals into email, then that would be an adequate time, and it would reduce the length of the lines at polling places, because we would never want there to be a surge of individuals changing their party affiliation to vote the candidate of their choice, and that line becomes long, and then people go home. Then, just in general, I would like in our community organizing communities the ability to everyone have faith that a presidential candidate coming into our state, providing the economic stimulus and the excitement that comes with that, that there is a clear way of participating. The next question I had, I'm just making sure I didn't have any other further questions. Okay, then going into Section 18, about how an individual would cancel their ballot, that it would be nice to have language included when individuals receive their sample ballot as far as what ways are preferred and recognized methods to cancel it, because the rules say that, and if I were a voter reading it for the first time, about how you get the ballot, and then if you return it for the party, the first party, that it should be something along the way of, these are the ways of canceling the ballot. And And that's it. Thank you very much. I, again, appreciate that there is a hearing. I'm very excited that we're going to have this presidential preference primary in our state. It offers a great deal of amazing opportunities to our students, to our military service members who get to be among the first to vote in the country, and to our communities, that when these candidates come and they speak to constituency groups all around our state, it just makes our state better. And I want every presidential candidate that comes to our state to be working hard to earn the vote of Nevadans, regardless of what party they represent.
Thank you, Ms. Kramer. And if I may address some of your questions. First and foremost, we 100% agree in the need for continued voter education and outreach across the nature of our elections during the 3 that we have coming up next year, making sure that voters understand, just like you highlighted, the difference between the president's preference primary and the caucus processes that may or may not occur, understanding what our closed primary in June looks like, as well as the timeline associated with the November general election. So I know to that end, our public information officer and really the team across the agency, under the guidance of the secretary, are working together to collectively think how we can approach that problem to get the most information to voters in the most timely, effective manner. In fact, I'd be remiss if I did not point out the Advisory Committee on Participatory Democracy is actually meeting late next month. It will be in a similar type venue, again, with opportunities for folks to attend both north and south, as well as online. I believe it's September 28th, and it's my understanding that a big part of that meeting will focus on outreach specific to the presidential preference primary. So I'm encouraging everybody that's interested, even remotely in elections and the electoral process, to attend. If you have any information, or if you'd like information on that, please let us know and we can get you the agenda as soon as it's published. Just to clarify one of your other comments, you did mention write-in options. Just want to make sure that if anybody saw or heard that, Nevada does not have write-in options for candidates, of course. So that if somebody is looking to write in a candidate, that is not an opportunity provided by statute. You also mentioned about sample ballots going out. A little bit of background on that as well. Some of the counties are planning on, I know they're at least considering right now, having a singular sample ballot that does have the candidates for potentially the Republican Party, as well as potentially the Democratic Party, kind of depending on who files during the October 2nd to 16th filing period. And I do believe that those are going out generally the first week of January, specifically to enable voters to see that, understand, like you said, if they need to adjust their party affiliation, and then provide guidance on how to do that at registertovote.nv.gov, in person in their clerk's office or registrar's office, or via mail. And then lastly, your comments about Section 18 and the canceled process, just a little bit of clarity on that one as well. This was specifically speaking to an issue that we had heard about during the 22 election cycle. And in fact, it was during a previous regulatory meeting that somebody highlighted the concern. In statute, it identifies the need to stamp a ballot that is canceled when somebody surrenders it at a polling location. But what we found was that there was a little bit of variance in whether an election board officer stamped the outside envelope or the ballot itself, or wrote it. So this, if a voter is interested in canceling their mail ballot, really the key is to have them bring it to a polling location and surrender it to an election board officer. And then the hope is this proposed regulation would provide that additional clarity so they understand where to write it and to mark that ballot, so that the voter can say, wait a minute, I remember There's like a workshop with the guy with the last name starting with W or something, and I think they got to write it on there or like stamp it, but it's got to be on the ballot one way or the other, and then they should see that to hopefully again increase voter confidence and just a general understanding of the process. But I do tremendously appreciate your comments and your time today, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure participating in this, and I'm so excited about the PPP coming up. Thank you.
Not seeing anybody else in Carson City. Is there anybody in Las Vegas interested in providing public comment on proposed regulation R014-23P? Not seeing anybody in Las Vegas broadcasting. Can we check the phones, please?
To provide public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Willett, Willett, from All Voting is Local. We just have a quick comment on Section 12B. Currently for SDR, if your driver's license or ID issued by the DMV doesn't have your current address, you can present another document such as your paycheck, bank statement, utility bill, etc., that has your current address. This regulation would make it so you can also submit a temporary ID card from a state agency to establish your residential address, as long as it has a photo. So our question is, why does this ID need to have a photo? They've already presented a photo via their driver's license, and none of the documents that are currently valid for providing or for proving a voter's address, like their paycheck, typically have photos. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your comments. We'll take the recommendation about removing the photograph requirement from R014-23P, Section 12, sub 1B. There it is. Thank you. We'll take it back for discussion, and may reach out if we have some further information. Could you spell your name, by the way, just to make sure I have it for the record?
Yes, it's Jennifer Willett, JenniferWillett.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Next caller, you are unmuted and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits, 927.
Hi.
You are unmuted and may start.
Thank you. Hi, this is Edwin Buddy Miller. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Great, thank you. I want to comment on Section 11 of RO14-23, and that's regarding the public observing the recounting of votes. As I review that proposed regulation, I noticed that it pretty much tracks NAC 293.356, which is regarding observing the counting of ballots as opposed to the recount. So with that in mind, I have a few things to point out. I noticed that there were some changes, and that, for instance, give me a second here so I can get to the right place. Thank you. A section in NAC 293.356 prohibits, Section 2A prohibits a observer from talking to workers within the central counting place other than someone designated by the county or city clerk to address questions from observers. That section is omitted from proposed regulation, Section 11, under its subsection 2. And I was curious as to why that might be the case, and would suggest that we might want to bring that back in.
Thank you for the comment, Mr. Miller. I will double check and may take your recommendation in regards to adding that additional provision into this one as well. I see what you're talking about, though, about the prevention of observers talking to anyone other than an authorized election board officer. But yes, sir,
Right.
we'll take that under
Essentially
review.
what it does is it funnels any communications, it funnels it through, in Clark County, I think they're called ambassadors, and they have somewhat similar name here in Washoe County, but it keeps them from reaching out to any other employee or staff person. And I think it's worked effectively, at least as far as observers of the counting of the ballots. So I'd like to recommend that. The same thing applies for in a 293356 2A4, which prohibits the interfering with the statutory duties of the county or city election personnel. I know it's kind of a generalized provision of that regulation, but I think it would have application also to the recount regulation, particularly since if we're in a recount situation, tempers might flare, people's blood might be up, and we want to keep everybody under control.
Mr. Miller, no, I understand your concern, and we'll certainly take that one into consideration as well.
Okay, great. Now let's see. One provision that was added in Section 11, subsection 2A3, and that prohibits an observer from arguing for or against or challenging any decision of the county or city election personnel. That provision does not exist in NAC 292356. And I guess part of the concern is that one of the reasons for wanting to bring back in A1 of Regulation 356 is because it bars you from talking to the workers except to a designated person. And it channels you only into talking to that person and not arguing or challenging other personnel. But the other concern is, I think in the past, at least having some discussion with the captain at a poll or the designated person for the ballot counting does allow to give input, and sometimes it does remind workers of some part of the code or the regulations that they may have forgotten or overlooked or not be aware of. I'm certainly am not advocating for someone going on at length arguing or challenging a decision of the city or election personnel. But at least they should have an opportunity to make the point, especially if they're only talking to the person who they're told they can talk to.
Valid point, Mr. Miller. I understand, and we'll take that for consideration as well.
Yeah, I don't know if that gets close to any First Amendment issues, but anyway, I just throw that out. All right, the next one is what's called new in the proposed Section 11, the new subsection 4. And the new subsection 4 says that observers have to comply with the requirements that apply to members of the general public to a series of statutes that are identified there. There's 5 different statutes. The thing that I frankly tell you, though, is all these statutes talk to voting at polling places or activity at polling places and not with counting. So, for instance, 293, the first statute that's mentioned is 293274. And that statute basically has to do with conduct while voting is going on at a polling place. And I just wonder that if this regulation refers to conduct that goes on at a polling place, how applicable that's going to be and whether or not a judge is going to enforce it at a vote counting center or the location where the recounting is being done. And the same thing applies with the reference to statute 293305, which is incorporated. That talks about the closing of the polls, cutting off the line, and but allowing people to come in and observe the closing of the polls. And I don't know how that's going to apply to a recount situation. Same thing with a section NRS 293730, and that has to do with certain things that a voter, or generally a person who happens to be at a polling location, is not permitted to do, like loitering at the polling place, not accepting an overseas ballot, not removing the ballot from the polling place. And a vote, it also applies to a voter not accepting a ballot from someone, not delivering a ballot received from someone, not putting a mark on the voter's ballot, identifying that it was the voter, that is the voter's ballot. So I don't see how those apply also. And then the two last statutes, 293C, 269, and 297, same kind of issue comes up. One has to do with voting at the polls, and the other one has to do with closing of the polls. So that's my remarks in that particular section.
Thank you for highlighting that, Mr. Miller. Certainly the intent wasn't just to list unapplicable statutes. So we'll take that back, look at it, make sure that they're applicable from a legal standpoint, and amend it if needed. But thank you.
Okay, and one of the things, a couple of those statutes happen to mention about not allowing video or sound recording, and I think that's a good policy. And to me, I think that should be in the new proposed regulation outright, forbidding those kinds of activities. The new new proposed regulation under subsection 2A1 forbids using of a mobile phone or a computer within the facility. And I think it also should add any other kind of video or audio recording there, or whatever location you think is pertinent. Maybe that's what you were trying to get at by incorporating those statutes. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that. So moving on to the subsections 5 and 6 are pretty much the same as what's in NHC 293356. And likewise, in section 11, section 7 is the same. And then the definitions in section 11 are at the very end in section 8. One definition is for the verb advocate, and that's because advocating is not allowed, and so that definition tracks within NAC 293356, and that I think works. What's not in NA 293356 is a definition of meaningful observation, which was added to section 11. So I think it's good to try to define meaningful observation. Here it says it means a person may observe the recount of the vote. I don't know how much that helps to define it, but going on, it does say that the term does not include allowing a person to view the personal information of a voter, voter's ballot, or selections of a voting machine, or listen to any conversations between election board officers. And, I think that helps give shape to the definition of meaningful observation. One thing that I was going to mention, because I've been struggling with how you would define meaningful observation of the counting of the ballots and a recount, is to refer to NAC 293245, which is the requirements for a person to observe the conduct of a voting at a polling place. This regulation also defined meaningful observation, and the way it worked is meaningful observation means a person may observe the identification of voters who appear at the polling place to vote, the distribution of a ballot or voting machine card to a voter, the movement of a voter to a voting booth, the return of a ballot or voting machine card by a voter, and the exiting of the polling place by the voter. The thing I like about this definition is that it basically tracks what the voter does, and that's what you get to observe. And that's not too narrow, but it's actually quite specific. And I'm just wondering if there's a way that you could do something similar with the observing and counting of ballots or the recount of ballots. And possibly what you do that by tracking how the ballot is processed, during a recount or, in the initial count that goes on. If we go to Nevada law regarding recounts, we know that the recount has to be done in the same way that the original count was done. There's an inspection and counting of the ballots. It's part of the recount process. So it's meaningful observation to view those people inspecting the ballots and processing them through, once again, probably just running them through the tabulators, whether they're vote by mail ballots or running them through the computer if they're electronically held ballots. So anyway, those are my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. And again, as mentioned, the goal certainly through these proposed regulations is to increase the transparency and make more easy the understanding for voters, for election officials, and the public alike. So I appreciate you calling out those discrepancies. And in fact, the definition relating to meaningful observation that you cited from NAC 293-245 was the subject of a decent amount of debate, I would say, during our last regulatory review, in part because, again, it's so important, right? Like I know there's that fine balance between maximizing transparency, but then also ensuring the privacy of voter information and certainly the security and secrecy of the ballot. But your point's well taken, and I think there may be something that we can take back to discuss about how to more clearly lay out the tabulation process, to clarify for anyone reading the regulation so they understand truly what they're able to observe. So thank you for that.
All right, thank you.
Good afternoon. This is Ellen Gifford. I'm assuming you can hear me okay.
Yes, ma'am, we can.
My concern with this regulation is that it puts forth the same language regarding surrendered ballots that went to the counties in a memorandum for the 2022 elections. In many instances, that memorandum was confusing and misinterpreted, which resulted in voters being alarmed about how their ballots were being processed and frustrated election board officers refusing to handle surrendered ballots and one of them even walked off the job. To support the NRS stating that the surrendered mail ballot shall be marked canceled, Section 9 of this regulation states that the election board officer can stamp the ballot with a rubber stamp, write the word canceled on the ballot, tear a small corner off the mail ballot, use a hole punch to punch a hole in the mail ballot, or make the ballot unreadable when using a mechanical tabulation machine. It also states that the election board officer can, in addition to the surrendered ballot, stamp the return envelope with a rubber stamp or write the word canceled on the return envelope. The Nevada Revised Statute is simple and clear. It states that a person who receives a surrendered mail ballot shall mark it canceled. So for the sake of the poll workers who are responsible for this process, I'd like to suggest that this regulation should state at the very most that they shall stamp the surrendered ballot and the return envelope canceled. These instructions just must be specific and clear. For new workers as well as those who are experienced, uncertainty can cause mistakes, slow down the process, and even bring that process to a halt. Additionally, Section 9 states that if someone surrenders a shredded ballot, it must be placed in a bag labeled surrendered ballots. This regulation should apply to all surrendered ballots, but it isn't stated anywhere. In 2022, there were surrendered ballots being placed in many different types of containers and even mixed with other ballots because there was no clear instruction. Lastly, thank you for addressing the need for a clear process that properly supports the statute for surrendered ballots. It has been so sorely needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Gifford. And on a personal note, I'd like to appreciate or extend my appreciation for your support in identifying and working with us to address this problem. I understand your recommendations. Certainly, the goal is to keep things as simple and easy as possible. There's a lot of merit to simplicity, not only for, as you mentioned, the public, but for the election board officers who have to execute these regulations in what can oftentimes be a pretty chaotic and stressful environment. And we'll certainly see during the next 3 times next year during these election cycles as numerous voters are coming in with questions, trying to get in line, trying to ask individual election board officers, and others are trying to surrender those ballots. All the while, the election board officers are trying to make sure they do what they need to comply. I will tell you though that it is still an ongoing challenge too, recognizing that across our 17 counties, there are differences in how those county election officials are choosing to, gather in some cases. Some cases it's bags, as we had talked about. Other cases it's a box that is where they gather those surrendered ballots. So I think this we'll continue to work on this one. I understand your recommendations, and we'll certainly take that back. The more simple we can get it, I think you're right, the better off everyone will ultimately be. And while we did attempt to incorporate the guidance and some language from the guidance that you remember was initially published on April 10th of 22 and then amended September 5th of 2022 and then amended again for the third and final time on September 27th of 2022, I think indicating our attempts to make it more simplistic and more, both more simple but also more comprehensive. I understand your concerns, and we'll certainly take that back and review it to see if there isn't a way that we can perhaps make it more simple, more clear, and more executable, given the while recognizing that the numerous other requirements that election board officers are going to have to do next year. But thank you for your participation.
Thank you. I know it's going to happen.
If you have recently joined the call or have not had a turn to speak yet, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Good afternoon. My name is Jane Davis from Pahrump, Nye County. Do you hear me well?
Yes, ma'am, we do.
Okay, thank you. I wish to ask a question regarding R014-23P, Section 11, subsection 2, lowercase a in parentheses, and parentheses 3. It deals with challenging election officials' decisions during a ballot recount. What is the process to be used in questioning a decision made during a ballot recount? Since officials have the power to control the environment surrounding ballot recount, the public can easily be muzzled at the official's discretion. If information became available that was important and might initiate a different decision, what should be done? The revision is unclear, as is the statute NRS 293C-269. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. In regards to your question, and quickly looking down at the draft proposed regulation, the site, just for everyone listening in, that she's talking about, this is in relation to recounts relating to the observation of a recount. And it states specifically that before observing a recount, a person must sign an acknowledgement in the form prescribed by the Secretary of State, stating that the person during the time while the person is observing the conduct of a recount, they have to acknowledge that he or she is prohibited from, there's a list. The third item that Ms. Davis cited is arguing for or against or challenging any decisions of county or city election personnel. So first I would like to speak kind of quickly to the reason that this became an issue, and that's specifically because during the conduct of a recount, right, and really you'll notice similar verbiage elsewhere in regulation, when those election officials are conducting it, if it were allowed for someone to say, hey, wait a minute, I disagree with your decision on that specific ballot, in the moment, it could prevent, frankly, and maybe by design, maybe not, but it could prevent an adherence with other statutory timelines. Recounts have to be conducted. It started within a certain period of days and ended within a certain period of days. And you could see, I think, that if somebody were interested in disrupting that process for whatever reason, if they called into question every single decision of those election personnel on the spot, it would certainly have the chance to extend it. So that, I think, is part of the reason why it was established and proposed. I will also say, though, to the second part of your question, and I recognize that also has equal importance. Well, then what? If you see somebody doing something, an election personnel, to use the wording out of the statute, not doing their job properly, or want to bring something to their attention, what is your appropriate recourse or action? I would say that there's really a couple that you could take in a timely manner. The first and foremost that I would direct you to is to contact, again, at the county level, that county election official. There's usually a supervisor, a manager, someone there, or as mentioned in Clark County, they have ambassadors that you could draw the attention to. Again, the key there is that there's a right person to talk to, but not necessarily the individuals who are in the moment conducting that work. So identifying first and foremost the supervisor. If you don't get a satisfactory conclusion out of that discussion, there's always the route of notifying the Office of the Secretary of State through our election integrity violation reports. The election integrity violation reports, or EIVRs, it's a form really just to ensure that we capture the appropriate information. That form is readily available on the website of the Office of the Secretary of State. And when those forms are submitted, certainly during, really between the day the mail ballots go out and the county and then ultimately Supreme Court canvass, those EIVRs that come into the Office of the Secretary of State's Elections Division get scrutinized very quickly and identified for urgency. So if there's one that says there's a concern, it's maybe a little bit longer term, type of an issue, that will be prioritized below an individual who, for example, identifies that they have been disenfranchised or kept from the polls or otherwise identify a much more timely and urgent issue. Those timely and urgent issues are addressed extremely quickly. And if someone were to provide some information relating to a recount, again, recognizing the very urgent nature of that recount process, I would like to reassure you that there would be phone calls made and questions asked, assuming that there was appropriate amount of information, of course, and the appropriate evidence to support it for further information. So I don't want you to think for a second that if you have a question or are you would like to challenge the decisions of any county or city election personnel, that you are unable to, but really the focus is to ensure that it's done in a timely manner. And you will, the last thing I'll say is that you will notice that that's kind of a reoccurring theme across Title 24 when we look at election law. For example, if there is a question about the eligibility of a candidate who files for office, there's specific times in statutes following the close of a candidate filing period, for example, when those candidates, that challenge window is to occur. Before it, long after it, isn't like the window is the window, if that makes sense. And there's other type provisions that ensure that everyone is able to clearly understand when these sorts of challenges or questions are able to be raised so they can be adjudicated appropriately. But I do appreciate you calling that out and giving me the opportunity to provide some additional clarity. But does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And thank you for calling. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
We have no more callers wishing to provide comment.
Thank you, Broadcasting. In that case, at this time, I will close public comment relating to proposed regulation R014-23P. And we will now open public comment on matters other than the previously listed LCB file numbers. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes per person. If anyone is interested in providing public comment about a matter not on the agenda, please identify yourself and come up to the front. Seeing nobody in Carson City, we'll go to Las Vegas. Seeing no one in Las Vegas. Broadcasting, can we check the phones? And again, this is for public comment on matters other than the previously listed LCB file numbers on the agenda.
To provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. You have no callers wishing to provide public comment at this time.
Thank you, Broadcasting. In that case, I will close public comment on matters other than the previously listed LCB file numbers, and we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for your comments and participation today. I will simply say in closing that please note the Secretary of State may propose additional amendments following consideration of today's testimony and any further written comment from the public. To ensure you receive a copy of the amendments in advance of the adoption hearing, I would encourage you to sign up for our e-notify through the Secretary of State's website at nvsos.gov. If you have any problems or questions, please contact our Elections Division at 775-684-5705 or via email at nvelect@sos.nv.gov. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.